All right, let's start with Yuval's topic on Object Lambda.
Hey, yeah, so this is something that Gal sent me. He wanted to know, he had discussion with somebody over some internet forum. He wanted to know whether the what we did with the Lua scripting is similar to AWS Object Lambda. Um, and I've looked at what they did. So there are a couple of differences. One of them is that they're not restricted to Lua. They have all kind of language support. They're just manipulating object gets, which makes sense because this is what you have to manipulate inline. You cannot do it offline. But the one difference that I've seen there, and this could kind of make me think about maybe a different approach that we can take there, is that they use a different gateway, or at least a different URL, if they want the object processing to run. Because one thing that kind of worries me, and I guess also you guys, when it comes to the object processing via Lua. So when if it's just switching some metadata fields, then it's probably not too bad. But if it comes to actually reading the object or reading chunk from the object and doing some heavy processing on them, then it kind of okay. We don't want to those scripts to hog all the CPU of the RGW and kind of make all the rest of the people using the RGW to upload the download object. We don't want to slow them down. Scaling would be a problem, and estimating the capacitive system would be a problem. And what they did in AWS is that if you want to fetch the object and you want to run the Lambda function against it, then you use a different URL. And I was thinking whether this is something that we can do. I mean, one option would be to go with something like multi-site.
A lot of discussion about this, and
but that would be duplicating the actual data, and that doesn't make sense.
I don't see why you would ever do that. Look, it's a whole different. This is a whole line of development there, but there's been right, and Gal's even been in conversation, been in meetings with people about different things. Because serverless functions and supporting them from object storage or without object storage is a whole area where people have written entire suites of software to run such serverless functions, right? That's the case, so all of those would be out of process.
Well,
or most of them would be. There's also been conversations about having a converged one. That would and people and I think I can say here, we had meetings with Ronan Kott's team, and Gal was present, so I'm a little confused why he doesn't remember it. But I mean, one of Ronan's, if you remember, maybe you were looped into some of that too. One of the things that Ronan's team did was to develop the prototype of what IBM calls Fabric.
Right.
And Fabric is its own sort of technology for doing a bunch of things. Fabric is the core functionality intended for Fabric was that it would be a gateway and with an interface to a variety of it has an interfaces to a variety of backend systems. But I think the consumer interface for it is actually uses Aeroflot in some way. And you can insert it into various workflow pipelines or application data pipelines, and it imposes data passes through it, and it imposes advanced security, enforces policy-based security, and of various kinds on the data or the access, and it could include restricting how much of the data can be seen, which columns and column or data sets can be seen. It can anonymize or transform things. They wrote all this and approached us asking for whether this was, we talked to them about whether implementing an object lambda using a technology like this would be interesting. One of the reasons is that they have this the sort of heart of this part of Fabric was a WASM runtime that they could accelerate, and they had already written all these transforms to allow WASM32 codes to interact with 64-bit data and other stuff. But then there's a whole bunch of things out there, right? That I haven't really. I don't know which of us have explored them, but there are whole suites of software that do serverless functions, and as an infrastructure component, which you could link to S3. So these are all things that could be done. I mean, I know, right? So there's a question of, does RGW need or want its own system? But I think if we start combining it with, it shouldn't be inside of RGW, then I think the idea of RGW doing it, I think those premises fight with each other. But I think if you then say it can be outside of RGW, there's a lot of off-the-shelf stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my kind of question was, so if this is something, so the whole idea is about like inline processing, right? Because if this is like offline processing, then we have a whole
it's off the shelf. But yeah, if it's inline, then I would say there's interesting projects there. But I wouldn't be focusing on how to get it outside and inside at the same time. I'd be focusing on how to get it inline, but very efficient and safe. So sandboxing and other ideas come up at that point. Hence maybe the run-in stuff is interesting.
I see. Okay. Yeah. I mean, also, like, really the question that I raised here is that at least AWS, they kind of switched that to two different gateways, or
at least they made an extraction point there, but both would work, right? You could have RGW front end exposing a URL, or you could have it to something else to it.
Yes, like, sure, we don't know what they do, but I think that the idea is that if you just want to fetch the object, you use one URL. Even if you want to fetch the object that goes through something, you need another URL. Maybe this is not the gateway. Maybe this is something that's done before that.
They've created the flexibility so they can do that, and they probably are doing it out of process. But we wouldn't have to make that choice.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious what the advantages are for doing it inline instead of as some other client that just issues a GET request to S3 and processes the data that it gets back.
Well, when you do a GET, then you can't. You have to do that inline, whether it's in the RGW or in some other layer. Could be, but it has to be inline, because you can't. I mean, when you do a put, then you can later on kick something that would do the processing, because you just uploaded something, and it doesn't really matter whether this is going to be the right thing immediately or later on. When you do a GET, you have to get that, right? So
another thing, like I don't know if this is true of Object Lambda per se. I don't know everything about Object Lambda, but like another thing that, remember when Nuba came, one of the things that Nuba said it could do and had some logic for was you could add to the processing pipeline. This is more like the Lua integration now in some ways, and some things you could do. Like they had an example. I don't know. I'm not fronting it as an exemplar of good practice, but one of the demos they had was a credit card anonymization, data anonymization, which is something that, so it could be inline and permanent and a put. Other ideas like this. So there are reasons why you would, who knows whether object, but there are hypotheticals where you would do something that maybe isn't the same as what most Lambda processing is, but where you do want to sort of converge the processing together with the operation, because for either for performance reasons or for not I guess non-refutation. By the time the data is at rest, it's where you want it, that kind of thing.
Right. Even if you're limited to the GET, I think to Casey's point, then sure, the client can do everything with the data, but sometimes the owner of the data is not the client that gets the data, right? So it could be that the owner of the data wants you to get something that goes through some filter or some processing, and they don't want to count on the implementation of the application or the client to actually do that. I mean, this is what the Object Lambda is for.
But one of the things is that but I think broadly, I mean, I think in terms of, at least in terms of like prioritization of work and sort of likelihood of impact, it seems like a lot. I think it seems like the argument for doing it instead of RGW is not as strong as for at least the bigger picture than that, because so much of this sort of area would be about building a resilient ecosystem with the developers can use to organize the different codes and outputs and credentials and all that stuff, and it's a whole different sort of area of activity and it can always just access S3.
Yeah.
Yeah, just in general, I would like to treat RGW as just the S3 storage and layer things on top of S3 so that it works with anything, unless there are real benefits to having it in line like that.
It certainly seems to me like you'd have a hard time winning a race with well-developed infrastructure that does that. And like, for example, with the WASM system, it's got multi-language runtimes and all those things. So probably that would be, but it's possible that the WASM work by Ronen's group is useful. It's possible other people are doing similar things as part of other serverless function suites, and all of those should be able to consume us via S3.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sure, you can put that in front of the RGW and do whatever processing, and if it just speaks S3 at the other end, then it does the same thing. Yeah.
I mean, the point you made about at the beginning about it wanting to be elastic and not sort of competing with RGW for its resources, that's a strong point.
Yeah.
And so you have some elastic compute facility that's with the separation of concerns. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I think this is why AWS separated that. So they'll have better control on the how things need to scale. Yeah.
I mean, I feel differently about the data integration piece, like the Aeroflight stuff, and so I've been pushing for that to be. I think routing pipelines and things like that. The kind of purpose of that is to be there's a likely advantage to being close to the storage there, or at least that's kind of our pitch. But I'm sort of thinking that the best way to write these things is as some sort of elastic facility that's not part of the S3.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
And I think the Casey's way of saying it may be better. I think I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. That makes sense. I mean, as what we've seen in the Cephlacon is doing those small manipulations on the metadata is useful inline. Like what
I think there's a role for that, but I think it's like sneaky. I think it's like the argument for doing it. We like if the data is stored, we want to assert that our pipeline stores it one time with the annotation, or one time with the markup, or whatever, or the whiteout, or whatever it is, and it not being available to be stored to be observed in the other state might be one of the arguments for it.
Right. Yeah, but more heavy processing on fetching objects is probably better done. I mean, it could be done inline, but not inside the RGW. I agree.
Yeah, I guess that's all true. And so, what occurred to me the most was that there's a role for there's potentially a lot of software engineering involved in building that that elastic runtime.
Yeah. Okay, that's all. That's the only discussion point I had.
Cool. Well, I'm interested to hear more about the ideas around Aeroflight, especially. I did a round of review on Eric's work, and I'd like to find a time to discuss it when he's present.
Yeah, that sounds good. Ali is on vacation too, but Ali's been working on the piece that would connect it to like Spark, hopefully.
Okay, it wasn't clear what the integrations would look like, but this would be us writing something in Spark that kind of translates to our service, or?
Well, I think the idea is that Spark is going in. Spark connectors are evolving interfaces that we'll just implement. So Eric has been working on Eric's prototyping is aimed at getting the basic Aeroflight interface there. which is really, really narrow, or at least, well, it's not quite, but it's relatively narrow. It's a super generic is what he's doing right now. But people are, but the Spark community is already layering stuff on top of Flight that is more interesting. Like there's something called Flight SQL, which has capabilities like a superset of our S3 Select in some ways. And it would be, and the idea would be that the generic optimization of Flight SQL integrated into the Spark connector or into the Spark catalyst with the connector enabled would let us just be a first class provider for data sets, where they could send push downs similar to how S3 Select does, and maybe other stuff after that.
Okay, cool. So there are kind of protocols out there. We're not just inventing this in RGW.
Exactly, man. No. The whole excitement around it is precisely so. Yeah, we're not just breadboarding a new way of talking to S3 or objects. We're trying to converge it in. We're trying to meet up with something that's being evolved.
Okay, yeah, that was one of my main questions on Eric's PR, and I didn't see any links or extra information about this stuff.
There's a lot to it, but this is sort of the base level where we show, okay, we've got an Aeroflight there, and you can do some simple operations, and we can embed some conventions there. But I think the gold we're after is above that, and it's probably in the Flight SQL space or something, some other protocols, sub protocols that end up getting layered on. But they should all, but there should be free money here. There should be a free integration with Spark ecosystem here, similar to S3A, but it's not S3.
By the way, if we are gonna develop the skills to write stuff in the catalyst, this could be useful for S3 Select's offering as well, because like, at least this is what I know from Gal, like there are some limitations and some things that we support and are not supported by AWS, and like the Catalyst implementation is very, very kind of prudent, and whenever he's not 100% sure that the server side gonna ingest that correctly, they're gonna just say, just give me the entire object, I'll do the work. So they're very
we're gonna have to be able to give information back. There may be development here in order to propagate the intuitions back to the optimizer for sure.
Yeah. So that could be very useful. I mean, this would be good because that would demonstrate the real power of S3 Select, because currently, because the client is kind of cautious, they're not gonna, quite often they're not pushing down the query, they're just doing everything themselves.
Does this apply mostly to this actually? I mean, to the extent I don't know which things you know, which things Cal knows. I mean, we spent a long time sort of fighting with this. I mean, there's in addition to S3 Select, well, S3 Select hasn't seemed to be a big theme in Spark. Although for cold data, it can always show up there. They have S3, they have S3 there. But for S3 Select, there are some applications that are starting to use it, but it took a long time to get all the way there. But like one is Trino PrestoDB. So this Gal did work to get PrestoDB to work, although just as you said, their optimizer isn't Catalyst, but it also tended not to be using us, when he expected it to. And then we tried to use Trino because we had people testing with that, and Trino didn't even have S3 Select working. So we've since read a couple of white papers that suggest that some parts of Trino now have it. So each of these application ecosystems have some notion of an optimizer that does just what you say, has to decide whether to push down something and whether it would be used, whether it would prefer to, and Spark its Catalyst. So yeah, each of these things has to have some way of deducing whether it should. And I don't think this is a well evolved area in S3 Select really at this point. But I think but the problems with S3 Select might be simpler. But I think it's I think it's a very important topic for the hot integration over on the Spark side. When it's going to need some sort of way of inferring when it could be a good idea, and it's going to have information from us. Otherwise, how could it know that that we've decided to cache this object, and it should probably go back to us.
Right.
And I guess I should mention a related thing was Curies, this prefetcher. You know, the Spark. This was work that was done by the students at Mass Open Cloud, but they have this engine that they glued into Spark, and they glued into a couple of other things too. One's called something called Pig, but Spark was one, and Spark would when Spark wants to when Spark queries or other jobs in Spark are set up, Spark creates a DAG, a description of the work and a graph description of the work, and at the point where when it does that, and inserts them into its collective work plans, this glue stole the DAG and sent it over to this Curies engine, and the Curies so the Curies thing would look at all the DAGs that it had seen recently, did a critical path analysis on them, and decided which objects were going to be needed at what point. And it would use them to prefetch stuff into the cache, and it could use them to discard stuff we weren't going to look at anymore.
And this is their cache or something that happens inside the RGW?
This was done for a D4N, this is part of it, that sort of ecosystem where there would be the cache inside of RGW. Although in theory it could drive other caches.
Yeah, I mean, this looks pretty specific, or maybe too specific for the RGW. Like, I mean,
well,
doing the
analysis,
analysis,
so I don't think it's too specific for it.
not the cache part, but doing the analysis of the work that is needed by Spark.
No. It took Spark view and turned and reduced it to just the objects that were going to be accessed.
Oh, okay, I see.
And the data path.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying. No, yeah, it wasn't trying to. It ignored any information about the job that, except its implied data accesses.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Anything else you want to cover today? If not, thank you. See you next time.
See you.